So I wanted to make an entire video breaking down every reference while I get into the costume, because it's really cool to see the layers that go into a something. And with Senator Anakin Skywalker, every single piece in this costume has a reference to something in the Star Wars universe, and I really wanted to make sure that that was apparent. So, with the pants that we see, the reference is actually one of my favorites, which is Darth Vader's pleather. So the bodysuit of Darth Vader has quilted leather. I found pleather that has the same quilting pattern, and so I bought it and created pants out of it. And then the middle is crest, and the crests are actually a reference to another thing that I have on the costume itself, which is the tabards, which we'll get to later. And then there's a lot of embellishment and everything. The boots also are a reference. There's a lot of quilting, so I had to reference the sort of quilted pieces on Star Wars costumes and like smuggler outfits. And then there's also beadwork at the bottom, which is inspired by Padme Amidala's kimono gown, which is one that'll come up very often. The tunic references Dune, which Dune and Star Wars are very, very adjacent. So there's a sandworm on one side, the peacock is for royalty, and then the tunic itself is based off of Chancellor Palpatine's, I think, one of his Senate robes with the big sleeves, and then a Jedi robe with the brown. And if you get really up close, there's a lot of texture on it. The robe is also chock full of references. So the robe references a lot of Padme gowns, the kimono gown, the throne room gown. The bottom pieces are based on the throne room gown. The couching pieces are based on the kimono gown, because when you look at the kimono gown, there's all these beautiful like couched lines with beads, and so I really took inspiration from that. But then there's also lots of silk, lots of little tiny details, and then the embroidery itself is inspired by the packing gown, which has this beautiful panel at the front. So then we get into the pauldrons, which at the top of the pauldrons, there are two giant pieces of beadwork. The beadwork is the the Republic symbol, which is this like little crescent symbol, and so it's beaded in there. And then the tabards themselves, which are on top of the pauldrons or underneath the pauldrons, are actually based on Jedi tabards. And then the little tabs in front, there's more quilting, because like I said, quilting is a very smuggler thing to do with a little bit of edging, and it's a really fun little piece. The back, it also goes all the way down beyond the train. It's all fancy. But then there's also the belt. So the belt is, I made it a corset because of course I did. It's fully boned and inspired by Jedi belts. So you'll notice that the boning channels are highlighted, right? The boning channels are highlighted to reference sort of the little pieces that you see on the Jedi belt, the belt loops, and then there's also the little like, I don't know what they're called. They're from leatherwork. They're like studs. I think there's little studs. They're based on studs. There's also a whole bunch of other tiny details based on the pouches, where the pouches would lay, where the buckle would lay. So it's all like, everything does have this crazy little reference, because I basically took a Jedi belt and I made it all fancy. With the looping, I chose a red thread. There's a lot of red and there's a lot of blue, right? So you notice the red-blue contrast. That is based on Sith and Jedi. Now, the original robe that I had for this costume before I made this one, which is another beautiful robe that I do wear often, don't worry, is a red and blue changeable silk, but Silk Baron was out of the Caladan silk, which is sad because Dune, but also, so I chose a brown and a blue one, which this blue is beautiful. There's a little back panel of embroidery, which is also based on the packing gown. I kind of put it in there because I had to do a little bit of altering, and then the altering seams looked kind of weird, so I just covered it up with something, which is completely fine. But yeah, you'll notice on the front of the belt, there's a whole bunch of like little pieces where pouches should be, where, you know, the little studs are, where there's just a lot of little detail. And I think I just had so much fun trying to find ways to nod to little things. Now, a fun fact about the tunic is actually the inside of the collar also has embellishment and embroidery, because I am indeed a little bit of garbage. Yeah, and so you'll notice the train. So at the moment, the train still needs a couple of weights. I didn't have time before the convention to put in some weights, so I'm going to put, when I get home, I'm going to grab like a few yards of curtain weights and just like sew it along the hem and then re-sew the lining on the inside of the hem, which is, I think, completely fine. I would much rather have something that feels really strong and solid. Now, the fishtail is something that I actually have recycled from an old project. So the fishtail was originally an idea I had for a Prince Ben Solo, and I saw it and it was so cool. It looked really cool, and I was like, oh no. So I did it again, and so I made more of it. The cording and the couching on the back of that are inspired by Padme Amidala's throne room gown again. So you'll at the top of her gown in the throne room, the red one, there's a whole bunch of this like what I call braining. It's this really cool form of like couching embroidery that's just really pretty, and there's a lot of it on this costume, even in the embroidery pieces on the robe. It's really, really cool, and I absolutely adore the way that it looks. It's just so pretty. The crown is based on, one, elven crowns, because I'm a huge fan of the elven crowns. Two, Padme Amidala's like really gorgeous beaded crown she wears with the kimono dress, where it's just so many beads that hang and drape down, and so I decided to take inspiration from that. And then another inspiration just from the concept of royalty, royal crowns, and the strange way that Star Wars headdresses manifest. Now, I've been considering making a ridiculous crown like Amidala's, right? A really big one that sits out. So maybe in the future, I'll find some way to do like foam filigree and make like a really gigantic like crown. But for now, this one is absolutely gorgeous, and I do love it so much. And then the last thing is the hand. So I have an entire arm that I wear with this hand too when I compete this costume, but for comfort, I don't like to wear the arm. It's very restrictive in movement, and it's very hot because it's just foam. But I do have the hand. Now, the hand is almost as, well, it's as screen accurate as you can get without, like, removing body. Like, Anakin's hand is hollow on the inside, and I have a hand. I have flesh and a bone. So I had to make do with the use of black, and the use of black as a way to just make that thing not exist. So there's a lot of warble on the hand, and then anything that is supposed to be hollow, I just covered in black, or was black, right? It's painted, or it's just a glove, to hopefully, like, make it look like it should exist, but also, like, not. Yeah. So, for me, this project, when I first started it in 2021, wasn't supposed to take this long. I think it was, I had planned, like, 6 months for it, but that was in 2021. Like, January of 2021. By March, which it is now almost April, we would still be going, and now we're still going, and you know what? It's really cool. So hopefully this gave you some insight, and there will be a whole construction video coming, so if you want to see that, you can subscribe. I'm very excited. I'm going to try to be more active on here. Perhaps you will see this at C2E2 again this weekend. See ya.